Hey guys, my name's John. This is my first YouTube video, so bear with me here. Recently I was asked to make a how-to video on how to make some of the vertical assist jigs that I use. I do a lot of vertical jigging in a kayak offshore. I've been doing it for quite a few years now, and I seem to be relatively successful with it. There are a couple things that you're going to need. Once all said and done, you're going to end up with something that looks like this. Now normally I will set up this on top, and then I'll do the same thing on the bottom of my jig. So I've got the two hooks. It's got a lot of Mylar flash going on with some glow material. They're not too hard to make, but again, you will need certain materials. As far as what you'll need, you're going to need something like this. Now this is just a piece of metal fishing wire bent over with some type of a handle. I use little snapper beads for it, but whatever works for you. You're also going to need some Dacron, also known as hollow cord. Now this is 200-pound test. Normally I don't use a fluorescent green color like this. I prefer a white, but for the purposes of this video I grabbed some old Dacron just so you can see it. You're also going to need super glue. Now, as far as super glue goes, I prefer the stuff that has a brush on the end of it. You can find this at Walmart in the craft section. If you go to the other section that has different adhesives, at least at my Walmart, you won't find the brush. You've got to specifically go to the craft section for the brush. It does make it a lot easier to use, and also because it's got the screw-on cap, your super glue will stay good for a lot longer. You're also going to need liquid electrical tape. Now, as far as the color that you choose, either red or black, I guess it's to each their own. I personally use red just because it adds a little bit more color to my jig. I got this at Home Depot, but I assume they sell it at most hardware stores. You're also going to need some type of braided line. Now, this part is actually optional. I always make mine with a braided line only because I fish offshore in South Florida, and we do have a lot of toothy critters, kingfish and whatnot. And in the event that the fish bites a little too much of my hook and the Dacron gets caught up in the teeth, those teeth are like razor blades. It will cut right through Dacron. I add a couple strands to this in the middle of my Dacron. As far as color goes, it doesn't matter because you're not going to see it anyways. But it does add some extra support just in the event that you get that toothy critter. You're going to need a pair of scissors. You're going to need some type of thread and spool. Now, as far as the thread goes, I went online and I purchased a kit that was made for tying, I think it was fly lures and stuff like that. I want to say I paid $40 or $45 for it, and it came with a lot of stuff. It came with the thread. It seems a little smoother than normal sewing thread. I think it's specific to tying lures, but that doesn't mean that normal thread wouldn't work. Again, to each your own, whatever's clever. But it does come with the spindle, and this is pretty important for doing these types of things. It also came with a mechanism to hold the hook while I'm working on it, which is also pretty important. So I recommend that maybe you buy something like that, or maybe you can find a different way to hold everything. I'm not sure. And then lastly, you're going to need the material to tie to your hook. There are hundreds of options out there as far as different colors and stuff like that. Just some different stuff that I have. I do a couple of different types of glow material. One's a lot frizzier than the other, and I'll get into why I do that. I've got some stuff here that's got different colors to it. It's almost like a shiny rainbow color. And then I've got stuff that is a lot brighter and flashier, different textures, different consistencies. It's usually not too expensive for this kind of stuff, and it will last you a long time, but you will need something. And then worst case scenario, you know, I've got some old like tuna darts that are pretty beat up. I don't use anymore, but this material works for my purposes. So sometimes if I want to add a dark blue or a silver or something along those lines, I'll grab one of these. But as far as material goes, that's what you're going to need. This is probably going to be maybe a 2 or 3 part video. Again, my first YouTube video, so bear with me here. Okay guys, so we're at a point now where we're going to get into the first step. And the first step is to make the Dacron assist cord. So again, the way that I do mine, I like to thread mine with some type of braided line or Power Pro, something along those lines. I've been fishing offshore for about 8 years now. I have never had a fish cut through mine. However, when I was using stock setups with something like this, your basic jig that you buy, Williamson, will have a hook setup that looks like this. I have had them chew through that stock Dacron, so I've learned my lesson with this. But again, to each their own. So take a piece of Power Pro and your Dacron hollow cord. I usually cut mine in lengths of about 11 inches for the Dacron, and then I cut my Power Pro in lengths of about 23 inches. And then when I sit down and make these, I'll make a bunch at a time, just so that when I'm going fishing the next day, it's a lot easier for me to sit down. I've already got a bunch of these made, and I can start banging out some assist hooks. But again, you know, to each their own. As far as the length goes, the reason why I make these a little bit longer is because I fish with different jigs depending on the depth that I'm going to be going out that day. I fish with some 7-ounce vertical jigs that are like this long, and sometimes I'll fish with 3-ounce vertical jigs that are this long. The material is pretty cheap, so I'm not worried about making them too long, because then I'll just cut them down to size based off of the particular jig that I'm making the hook for. So let's get started. You're going to need the tool that I showed you earlier. Go ahead and take this and thread it through your Dacron. So take your Dacron and just thread it all the way through. Alright, like so. Then take your Power Pro and you're going to thread that through the middle of your tool here and bring it to its halfway point. Like so. Now bring that all the way through the Dacron. So you're going to pull that back through. Okay. And then unhook it from the back. It's always better to have your hollow core a little bit longer. See how I've actually got it sticking out both ends than the Dacron, only because it's easier to work with. You're gonna have some slack in the Dacron, so I like to take my fingers and compress it back out, make it nice and tight again. Now your next step is you're gonna figure out what just less than halfway is. Okay, so make one end a little bit longer than the other, about like that, okay, and figure out what your halfway point is. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the shorter end and out this center piece. So this is my shorter end. Take this and thread it back through your hollow core to the point where you measured was just less than halfway, and come out. Alright. You're going to take this end and stick it through your hoop about 1 inch. So open that up a little bit, thread it through, a little bit hanging out, right? And then you're going to pull this back through itself and out the other side, like so. It's going to be a little tight, but if you pull, it'll come out. See how you got this real fat area here? Grab the bottom so it doesn't pull all the way through. Go ahead and take your little tool here off and straighten it back out. Your hoop size here doesn't need to be very big at all. Something about like that. And now you've got the first phase of this process done. You've got your Dacron. Now you can feel where that tip of the longer piece that you pulled back through is. So right here is about where that tip is. You want to cut this so that both pieces of Dacron are equal in length once you pull everything back through. So I'm going to take a pair of scissors. This is where a good sharp pair of scissors comes in handy, because you do have the braid on the inside plus the Dacron. So now I've got my nice clean cord to go ahead and start doing some of my hooks and those types of things. Okay, so now that you've got your Dacron hollow cord done, now you're ready to start making the assist hook that's going to look something like this, give or take. So go ahead and take your tool to hold your hook with and get that into position. I use a couple different size hooks personally, again depending on the size jig that I'm going to use, and I also usually prefer a slightly smaller hook at the bottom of my jig than the top. That's just personal preference, no rhyme or reason behind it. So I'm not sure exactly what size hooks these are. Probably close to a 5/0. This top one, and this bottom one's maybe a 4/0. I'm not sure. The last marine flea market I went to, I found a guy that was selling them in bulk. I paid like 20 bucks and got a bunch of them, and I've kind of been set ever since. So whatever the case, get whatever hook you prefer for your jig. Maybe take an existing stock-made jig setup, compare your hook to it, and find the size that you want that way. Or in the past, I've even taken a razor blade, I've cut all this stuff off and just used the hook that originally came with it, whatever the case. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your hook and you're going to take your Dacron and go ahead and thread the Dacron through the eye of the hook. I usually find it easier to go from the loop end because it does tend to get a little bit frayed down here, and that also depends on the Dacron that you're using. This yellow stuff, I don't normally make assist hooks out of it. Seems to be fraying a lot more than some of the usual white Dacron cord that I use. I haven't put super glue or anything on the bottom of this, and you see how nice and tight that is compared to this. I guess maybe it depends on the Dacron, whatever the case. So thread this through like so. Now what we're going to do is we're going to tie this bottom end around the shaft, and it's really just going to be a basic overhand knot. And before you say, well wait, you're only doing an overhand knot, I can tell you in all the years I've been doing this, I've never once had one of these come through. By the time the whole process is done with super glue and thread, etc., etc., this setup's very secure. So what you're going to do is take your hook. Let's see if I can do this a different way. All right. You're going to come around, give yourself plenty of room. You're going to go around the hook and then back through the hole that you just made. Okay? So again, it's really just a very basic overhand knot. Pull it tight, and you want to do it so that you have a little bit of line that goes past the eye of the hook and back on, because we're going to wrap this with thread and secure it. Now that's a little longer than what I usually prefer, so loosen it up, take some of the slack out, as you do this a couple times, you'll kind of get your own preference, but this is the basics of how I do mine. So now that you've got your hook that looks like this, again, I'm pulling on it and it's not even moving. Go ahead and secure that in your device. And I'll move the camera and see if there's a way I can get this a little closer for you. Alright, so again, mine goes in and locks down. Okay, this is where super glue is going to come in handy. I swear by this stuff. I actually take this with me when I go offshore, and anytime I do a knot involving braid, even if I'm going from braid to leader, I always put a drop of super glue on my braided knot, just because I've had braid come undone before, and this helps add a little extra security. So you're going to take the super glue and put it on the bottom part and a little on the knot. Okay. And then take your thread. What you want to do is you want to wrap these two pieces together. And this is why having a spindle really helps with this process rather than trying to do it by hand. Okay. And then you're just going to kind of just put a couple of strands across the whole knot itself. Okay. Take this off and show it to you. So at this point, this is what we look like. All right. You're going to cut all this off, so don't worry about that. It looks a little sloppy, but just wrap it on there real good. And then I always take some super glue afterwards. Put a little bit on my threads here. And it helps lock everything down pretty good. Okay, at this point, I will go ahead and cut my excess, like the little tail from my thread, cut that. Because the next phase of this part is going to be adding the different flash material that you want to use. So it's kind of important to not have anything sticking up or sticking out, because when super glue hits it, it makes it real hard, and it'll be like little prongs sticking out. All right. So at this phase, this is what we have. Okay. Looks like a little piece there. I guess depending on how OCD you are, you can go into more detail. Alright, so next step is you want to grab whatever material you're going to be using. Again, I've got all kinds of stuff here. The way that I like to do it is I like to put glow on the bottom. And the material that I have here, I have two different types of glow. Hopefully the camera can see it, but you see how this is real kinky? It's got those kinky knots in it, or the twists. I prefer this because when you wrap this, it tends to flare out and hold its flare a little better. So I put this as the first layer because it'll flare out and it'll make almost like an umbrella shape for my other thinner, flashier stuff to kind of move around on. So take your material. I like to take a little bit of a shorter, thicker bunch for this first layer, because once all said and done, I'm not sure how much you're really going to see it amongst everything else. It's almost acting as a texture to push the other materials you're going to put on here out. So I take a bunch, about like this much. I guess that's roughly about an inch, 3/4 of an inch, whatever your preference is. And I cut it. Okay. Hold on to this. You're then going to take your super glue and you're going to put some super glue on the shaft of your hook and on top of the threaded area here. Okay. This is really going to be add material, put a layer of super glue. Add material, put a layer of super glue. I don't know if that's how the guys that tie flies do it. I had a buddy of mine teach me how to do this a while back, So I don't know, that's just kind of how I've always done it. So put some on here. It's usually good to go just up to the knot or maybe a little bit past. You don't have to put a whole lot of thread, just a couple wraps, and you're ready for the next phase. I'll usually pull this and flare it out. So up close, this is what we have so far. And then you're ready for your next layer. I like to go with my next type of glow. Now this glow is real thin, real flaccid material, so it goes nicely with this. Now everything from this point I'm going to make a little bit longer than the back of this, and again, the purpose of this is to push out that other material. So I'm going to take a chunk, let's call it 1.5 inches worth of length, give or take. Cut a piece. I'm sure that there is technically a professional way to go about doing this. Some of the fly tying guys can tell you. I don't know what it is. This is what I've always done, and again, I'm doing this because I was asked to make a video on it. Okay, now this next layer I like to go above where my knot is so I can start hiding a little bit of that knot. Move it around a little bit so that you can kind of try to get it to wrap on both sides of the hook and it's not just strictly on top. Put a couple wraps on here. All right. Put some super glue. Now you're ready for your next one. At this point, I like to go a little flash. This is where, you know, eye of the beholder, so to say. Depends on what colors you like to use. I personally love this this rainbow material. We have a lot of snapper down south where I live, and I know that snapper love that pink color, and this has a little bit of everything in it, and it's not overwhelming as far as your primary color, so to say. It's kind of subtle, so I like to always throw a strand of this. Again, I'm going to take about 1.5 inches or so, maybe a little over. Cut a piece. Throw that on there. Wrap it. All right. Remember, so we're going to wrap, super glue, wrap, super glue, wrap, super glue. You get the point. All right. And then now I like to get into my outer layers, which are going to be a lot flashier, or a lot shinier stuff. So I'm going to take some of this. This is some pretty good stuff. It's almost like a crystalline type color. Take a little bit of this. Put it on there. Alright, and then you can keep going with as many layers and colors as you want. Just for the purpose of this video, I'm going to kind of speed it up. The last layer, whatever your last layer is going to be, I personally like to get something real flashy, something that maybe has a little bit of texture to it, and I like to make them a little bit longer than the rest of it, but I don't use very much of it. I only use like 3 or 4 strands of it. My personal favorite is this. Now I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to put it close to the camera, but you see how it's almost got this texture where it's got squares to it? It's also a little bit thicker than the rest of this material. I'll grab just a couple strands of this, maybe 4 or 5 strands of it. I like to make them real long, longer than the other ones. Let's call it 2 inches, maybe 2 1/4. And we'll put that on there as well. And that's going to be my last layer as far as the color goes. All right. So I'll put them on there. Try to fan them out when you put them on there. It's a little easier to get them to wrap all the way around the hook and the shaft of the hook. Okay, and then from here, sometimes you can kind of pull them and yank them, move them around how you want them. Put your super glue on there. Make sure you get right where the thread is going to end so that when you cut the thread, it doesn't flip up as like a little tab or anything. Let that sit for a second to dry, but in the meantime, I'll show you what we have. So this is the basic concept of what I got right here. Again, you know, if I'm fishing pelagics and I like to go mid and upper columns, and I know that when I go out for the day, I tend to use more of my darker blues, silvers, almost like a herring type color for at least in my area. Whereas on the flip side, if it's spring or summer and I want to go bottom dwellers, I'm trying to hook up with some nice mutton or some nice grouper, snapper, that kind of thing, I might focus on more of pinks and stuff like that with little hints of blue. But to each their own, it's going to come down to a color preference. Okay, so go ahead and cut your tab here. All right. And if you notice on mine, I've got these little areas flipped up from when I was wrapping everything. You want to try to trim those off, because this last process is going to be using the liquid electrical tape to just cover your threads and everything else, and this will poke through. So just take your scissors and try to trim it up about like that. Take your liquid electrical tape, and for this, if you have some type of a small cheap paintbrush or something, I recommend using it, only because the brush on the liquid electrical tape is pretty big and it's hard to get exact. So I'll usually just kind of move this aside. Take your brush here, and you want to coat this whole area in liquid electrical tape. But ideally, you don't want to get the actual fibers, you know, the different color stuff that you put on there. Liquid electrical tape, if you've never worked with it, dries pretty fast, but it will stain clothes, so try not to get it on your clothes. Obviously cover the whole thing. I usually find it easier to move my hook around while I do this. This stuff will dry in probably about 5 minutes. It doesn't take too long to dry. And that's it, guys. I mean, that's in a nutshell what I do. So hopefully this helps you catch some more fish. That's our end product there. And again, you do this for the top hook, for the bottom hook, and hopefully it helps you out. Sorry for the annoying first timer video here. Hopefully I didn't go on too long. Appreciate it.